Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out the small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot.
And today, as I am each month, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Craig Joseph. He is the Chief Medical Officer at Nordic Consulting, and as we do each month, we feature a News You Can Use episode. Craig, thanks for joining me today.
It's my pleasure as always. Thank you for having me.
So always a busy time with a lot of things going on, but boosters seems to be the major topic of conversation, certainly in the circles that I'm in and with people asking, you're heading out for your booster. You think you'd have done it weeks, months ago, right?
So let's be clear. We're not talking about my tetanus shot here. We're talking about our COVID vaccine booster. And I did mention to you as we were preparing for today's session that in several hours, I'll be going for my Pfizer booster. I was eligible about, you're supposed to wait at least 6 months from the time you got your second. We're talking specifically about Pfizer now. If you got 2 Pfizers, then 6 months after your second one, if you're in a certain category, then you are eligible for a booster, a third Pfizer at the exact same dose. And I'm going today. I've done very well with the other 2 in terms of side effects, hardly any side effects. And I'm quite nervous about this one because I've talked to many a physician who have done equally well as I have in terms of, minimal side effects, slightly sore arm. But I've heard a lot of people say that they really did feel the second one, or the third one, I'm sorry, that they got some aches and pains, and we're kind of not in good shape for 12 to 24 hours. So I'm prepared for that. I've got my ibuprofen and acetaminophen if I need it. But yeah, I'm going for it. Now I qualify for it for several reasons. If you're over 65, you qualify. Thankfully, I'm not there yet because
I was going to say you're checking off the boxes here. No,
I'm a young pup. I'm a young pup, Dr. Nick. I'm only 18, if you believe my fake ID. So if you have certain medical problems, you qualify. If you are in an occupation that puts you at higher risk, you qualify. I think that's pretty nebulous, but they're certainly looking at healthcare workers for sure are in that category. But also, I think people that deal with the public and have to be close to the public, which would include both vaccinated and unvaccinated folks, you qualify. And so I'm a big proponent. I'm going for it. But I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. And let's be clear though, the advice that I was just discussing was for the Pfizer vaccine. J&J is different, as is Moderna a little bit. Did you want to go into maybe discuss, hey, what's the difference between the J&J and Moderna in terms of the booster advice?
Yeah, so I think a great discussion, highly topical because the approvals just went through CDC and the FDA, and we're now at the sort of recommendation standpoint. And to be clear, in all of these instances, to be considered fully vaccinated, you still only have to have the original set of vaccines, and that is 2 for Moderna and Pfizer, 1 for Johnson & Johnson, and the relevant period of time after each of those. But they are now recommending, as you rightly described, boosters or third or second doses in the case of Johnson & Johnson, Janssen, that can be given in the case of the messenger RNA vaccines, so Moderna and Pfizer, to that population that you described. So I think that's true, as you described, over 65s, anybody in any of the special populations, which is relatively broad. That includes if you live with people, you work in a certain circumstance, all of those things that would contribute, obviously, to be done in consultation with your medical provider. Johnson & Johnson Janssen vaccine is the one that's different and worth calling out briefly. That's the single dose. It had slightly less vaccine efficacy, or VE as it's described online. And the guidance now is for 18 and over should be getting a booster or second dose, but interestingly can be of any of the other vaccines, including the Johnson & Johnson. So if you had one of Johnson & Johnson, you could go have number 2, or you could have a Pfizer or Moderna. There is some interesting papers that show different responses, and mixing and matching has actually been an approved strategy, in part for just pure logistics, because it might be challenging. But I think there is also some sense that you get a better immune response for those. In our household, we actually have the full selection. So we found all different versions. I personally had the Moderna one, and I'm in a slightly different circumstance. For the one family member that is on the Johnson & Johnson, I think the advice is reasonably clear, and getting another booster to essentially improve your immune response and just, I don't know, give it a nudge, I guess, I think makes sense. And, if you look at some of the data that's emerged, you might pick another messenger RNA, so not the Johnson & Johnson. And there is some differences between, but I wouldn't be sort of pushing hard on any of that. But for me personally, I'm not in a rush. I will, I'm certainly not resistant to it. And I believe in getting it, but I don't feel a compulsion to race out and get it. I'm happy to get it at the appropriate time if I feel like I'm in that category, and it's available. I think there's wide availability. And in my case, I might go with the same vaccine, or I might go with the Pfizer, which is the other messenger RNA vaccine. But I'm not quite in the same rush, because there was some changes to the dosing, specifically with Moderna. They were giving a larger dose. The booster dose is actually 50%. And you are challenging the immune system. We've seen some side effects around cardiac issues, or inflammation around the cardiac muscle that has specifically gone or seems to target the younger generation. That includes me, like you. I don't have a fake ID because I never knew how to get around that. And I didn't need one in the UK. I'm just going to say that whole thing here just continues to amaze me. But I'm ready to get it, but not quite in the same rush. I would push back and say, aren't you worried? Why are you not worried?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the risks are minimal, and the benefits are there. And one of the struggles we've had for the last year and a half, and will continue to have for a long time, is science keeps changing because we're learning new things, and some things you can hurry up and try and get results from, and others are just going to take time. And so, I'm certainly, I worry. I read about long COVID. I read about, so those are patients who often have very severe problems and hospitalized, and then when they go home for months or years, are having complaints and concerns that they never had before. And so it seems reasonable to say that that's related to the disease process. While those are typically we see long COVID in patients who had more severe disease processes already, we also see it in people who had very mild disease. So might have just had a cold, and under certain circumstances never would have been tested. Now that there's COVID, we're testing all the time, as we should, and find out, well, I've had a minor cold, I have COVID, and I don't want to, then you're going to stay home for the prescribed amount of time. Anyway, some of those patients have developed long COVID too. That concerns me. And I think if you ask me, hey, did you kind of create a spreadsheet and look at the risks of this versus that? I did not. My perception is, and I spend a lot of time looking at this, but not as much as the experts who do this for a living. My perception was, hey, I am in several of those risk categories. I'm not over 65, Dr. Nick. That's true, but I hit a couple of the other ones, and I think the risk is small, but it's and the reward is great, and so I'm going to go for it. And I had this conversation as you know, I was at a conference this week in the real world. That was very exciting. And coming home, I happened to start talking to the person in front of me in line who was not vaccinated. She was happy to share with me, and I had about a 20-minute conversation with her, trying to debunk some of the myths that she was unwittingly propagating to me. We've had some of these conversations before where as a pediatrician, I'm very comfortable in telling people about risks versus benefits of immunizations. And as I've mentioned, I think on this show, I've had, when parents ask me, hey, can you guarantee me there will be no side effects? I absolutely cannot. I cannot do that. And in the same sentence, I say, and I also cannot promise or guarantee you that when you drive home from my office to your house, you won't get into a terrible car crash. That can happen. That has happened. But that doesn't mean that I choose, or that most of us choose, not to get into a car because we think the benefits outweigh the risks. And so now, should you wear a seatbelt in the car? Of course you should. If you wear a seatbelt, does that mean you can't get hurt in a car crash? Unfortunately, it doesn't. It drastically improves your odds, but it doesn't guarantee anything. And so, yeah, that is the decision I have made. And I think, like you, I've got younger children, old enough that they've already all been vaccinated. I am not pushing them. I am not pushing them to go get it. I am pushing them to go get their annual flu shot. Hashtag go get your flu shot. I've got mine. Absolutely. I ran out to get that as soon as I could. So yeah, I'm not pushing them to get it. I suspect that get their boosters. I suspect that they will at some point, and that's where I'm at. And I think it's worthwhile to say once again what you already said, which is if you've gotten 2 doses of the mRNA, the Pfizer or the Moderna, or 1 dose of J&J, you are fully immunized. You are fully immunized. All of what we're talking about now is kind of icing on the cake, and an attempt to take your already excellent odds and make them even better.
I think great points. Fascinating to find you interacting with somebody that was not vaccinated for an extended period of time, which I got to say would be a little bit unnerving at best. I think you make a great point relative to the long COVID. It's easy to sort of forget about that unless you're sort of in the middle of it. And in fact, I did an interview with somebody who will be coming on my show a little bit later on, and he had and has suffered long COVID and has actually been through cycles of it that were really quite significant. And preventing that is a huge, huge deal. And I know you didn't produce a spreadsheet, but I think if you did, it might have some risk reward kind of chart that said the older you were, the more likely you are potentially to take one of those boosters because the benefits vastly outweigh. It is always a risk reward discussion and arrangement with yourself. And, I hope that people have the real data to be able to do that. For those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Today I'm talking to Dr. Craig Joseph, Chief Medical Officer for Nordic Consulting in our News You Can Use edition. We were just covering off the boosters and sharing a little bit of our own personal experiences, which hopefully will be helpful to others. Moving on to paper that we both saw and read that I think maybe had slightly different reactions to. I'm curious about yours. Was the analysis of click behavior in physicians that essentially allowed the researchers to identify physicians who were going to be leaving sooner rather than later. And I had a fairly negative reaction to that, because to me it highlighted the challenge of privacy and the problem that we have with all this monitoring. It reminded me a lot of the metadata discussion that took place around the sucking up of all of the metadata, as it was called, around telephone calls. We're not listening to your calls, but we're getting all the metadata. And everybody says, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. And here is a perfect example of why that has problems that you may not anticipate. And in this case, the researchers, I don't think were looking for that, but they identified it. And that now becomes a data point that your institution, if they're tracking all of this, and I'm pretty sure that most are, now have information and insights on.
Yeah, surprisingly, I did not have a negative or as cynical a reaction as you did, which is shocking to me, and I'm a little disappointed in myself, actually, now that I think about it. I will tell you that my first reaction was to laugh out loud, which I think I literally did when I read the abstract. So these were researchers that are looking at how doctors engage with the electronic health record. One specific EHR has tons, pretty much every time you click, the EHR makes a note of that and can summarize it then. And then those have been opened up to researchers who have been poring over. There's probably been at least a dozen articles in the last 6 months with this particular vendor's data log information. And so again, emphasizing there's no patient privacy issues. This is really just where are doctors spending their time in the EHR, and how long are they spending in the area where they get messages, and how long are they spending writing notes, and how long are they spending looking up information. And I think, as you point out, the goal for this study was to see if they could look at burnout information and predict. We know that physicians are becoming burned out. Actually, many of us are, whether we're clinical or not. But physicians in particular have been at high risk of not wanting to do their job anymore long before the pandemic, and certainly the pandemic has added to that concern. So that was what they were looking for. And curiously, what they found was physicians who spend less time in the message, I'll call it the message center, the in-basket, the inbox, whatever you want to call it, that's been shown to be a major dissatisfier. And we can get into that if you want later as to why that is. But so what they found was docs who spend, and certainly the premise, the hypothesis was, well, the more time you spend doing this kind of work, looking at test results, looking at other pieces of information, which may or may not be relevant to the care that you're trying to provide, the more time you spend.
I'm just going to interrupt you for a second and say work in inverted commas, but go on.
Work. And I could spend, an hour talking about why this is and some suggestions for how we can make this better. But be that as it may, what they found was the opposite of what most of us would have expected. What they found was physicians who spend, what they anticipated was physicians who spend a lot of time doing this work that many of us don't really think brings a lot of benefit to the patients and don't really want to do, that those would be the people that would be quitting practice, quitting their job, going to do something else. And what they found was the opposite, that docs who spend very little time actually doing this work are the highest risk of leaving. And again, that might mean going across the street to a different hospital, or it might mean retiring, kind of checking out from doing that work. And so I laughed because it's the exact opposite of what I thought. They have the thought process, no one knows for sure, but the way they explained this after they got the data was, well, maybe these are docs who are already in their mind checked out. And so they just don't care for it anymore, and they're just not going to do it. And again, let me emphasize, we're not saying that they're not taking good care of patients. Since we've had labs, we've had lab results, and doctors have looked at those. But now we are, in many cases, we clinicians, doctors, nurses are inundated with what is often extraneous information, which we're required or supposed to look at, review. Oftentimes, it's just junk mail. And so, yeah, so maybe people are like, just, I'm not doing the junk mail stuff anymore. I'm just not doing it. And so your point, I never went to where your head went, which was, well, now if they're looking in, which I don't think folks are going to do, but you're right that they could. They could say, well,
that seems an obvious thing. If you're now employing people, you're worried about loss, and you've got all these non-compete contracts. It seems an inevitable consequence. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine somebody not going directly there.
Well,
and this may be an initial correlation with people that are already burnt out and are checked out, but that doesn't matter. If this is data that serves you and gives you information, it's just very troubling to me that that's the case.
Again, I tend to be the most cynical person I know, and I'm sad that I'm disagreeing with you on this and being more positive and upbeat. I do know, because if you just look at it from dollars and cents, almost always it's much cheaper for an organization to retain a physician than it is to replace that physician. And so one could take a more positive view and say, okay, well, now if we've identified docs that are at high risk for leaving practice or going to a different hospital, we should now throw more resources at them to try to make their lives better and convince them not to leave. Because DEFCON
Nick, evil Nick goes, oh, great. So now there's an opportunity to game the system. I'm going to spend less time in the message center, because what that will mean is that the institution is potentially going to give me a more favorable contract. I mean, it bothers me, because not the way that we incentivize and create the best possible healthcare. I mean, I'm respectful of, intent, but the problem is when this stuff becomes available, you only have to go to I wish everybody could go to DEFCON at least one time, because you would see, and it is extremes, but it's extremes that demonstrate the challenge with this. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Right? It's just, what are you going to do?
Yeah, let me apologize to the audience and myself for not going there. And I don't know how I've been so optimistic, and I'll try and improve my ways.
No, please don't. It's good to flip roles occasionally. My glass is always full, as I'm always heard to be.
You're very optimistic in a
my glass is always full. It's half full of whiskey, half full of air. We've established that very clearly throughout all of the episodes and all of my posting. So
fair enough.
We're almost out of time. If you've got just the briefest of comments about minimal viable compliance.
Yeah, I wanted to, I was a term, so as we mentioned, I was at the health conference, and that's HLTH, because they couldn't afford the two vowels, the health conference in Boston. And it was my first one, and it was great. And a term I heard that I never heard before, which I wanted to share, was minimal viable compliance. Certainly, we've heard many of us involved in startups or Silicon Valley talk about minimal viable product, meaning what are the least number of features and functionality that I can sell to get this thing on the market, and then we'll make it better from there. Minimal viable compliance was the concept that I heard about of hospital systems and health systems, saying, hey, what does the regulation say we absolutely have to do? We're going to do that. We're not going to do anything more. So for information sharing, let's find the things that we absolutely have to share. We're going to share that. We're not going to go with, hey, well, it would be nice to do that, or that might be the intent of the people who made this law or regulation. And so, the National Coordinator for Healthcare IT, Micky Tripathi, was at the health conference, and he was really asking systems to not take that approach and to really share all the information that they can share, and not try to find the minimal viable compliance from a lawyerly or regulatory standpoint. So I thought it was funny.
It's a great term, but it's a very sad term, unfortunately.
Very sad.
I think it's useful shorthand to call people out for what is, I think in Micky Tripathi's view, is misbehavior. It's behaving with less than the best intentions for the patient. Unfortunately, as we always do, we've run out of time. Just remains for me to thank you, as always, for joining me and wishing you the best for your booster dose that you are about to take.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, The Incrementalist, or share with me at DrNick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at healthcarenowradio.com. And tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.